Councillors, I'll just ask you to mute your microphones if you don't mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're now audio recording and live streaming.
Thank you. Good evening, councillors. Thank you for your attendance this evening. My name's Mayor Patrick Hall at 6 p.m. on Tuesday, the 10th of May, 2022. And to the thousands of you out there in audio visual land listening in and watching us on YouTube, good evening. This agenda briefing is being held by electronic means in accordance with Regulation 14 of the Local Government Administration Regulations of 1996, and owing to the current state of emergency and public health state of emergency in response to the pandemic caused by COVID-19 declared on the 15th of March back in 2020. I now, of course, declare the meeting open. It is slightly after 6 o'clock. It's actually about 6:03 p.m. And we start by acknowledging the Whadjuk people, the traditional custodians of this land, and we also pay our respects to elders both past and present. Councillors, tonight's meeting, as you're aware, is for the purpose of asking questions and seeking clarification on agenda items for the next council meeting. No decision making or entering into debate is to occur at this meeting. It's only for the asking of questions and the receiving of answers. Agenda briefings are public meetings and any information you provide may be publicly accessible. This electronic meeting is being live streamed to the city's YouTube account. As far as disclosures of interest, the prescribed disclosure requirements apply to meetings that are convened under the provisions of the Local Government Act. However, it may be perceived as ethically unacceptable and at odds with the probity and accountability principles of the Act and the Codes of Conduct for elected members to participate in forums, briefings or workshops where they are aware that they have a conflict of interest and do not declare it. In the interests of openness and accountability, elected members are encouraged to disclose a conflict of interest where they are aware that they have one when attending a forum, briefing or workshop, and where applicable, remove themselves from the room whilst that matter is being discussed. Councillors, thank you. We have all of you present tonight, but just for the sake of the recording, I will ask you, I'll call your name and just ask you to confirm your presence. Of course, myself, Mayor Hall, I'm here. Deputy Mayor Ben Kunza.
Yes, I am present. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Mark Bain.
Present. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Lindsay Holland.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Jesse Jacobs.
I'm here, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Steve Parkinson.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Sarah Saberi.
Present.
Councillor Hardeep Singh.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Amanda Spencer-Teo.
Present.
Councillor Craig Sweeney.
Here.
Thank you. And Councillor Tuchek.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
All present and accounted for. Thank you. Apologies, there are, of course, none. Approved leave of absence at item 2.2, there are none. Disclosures of interest, I understand we've received a number. Can I refer to the City's Chief Executive Officer, Stephen Kane? Mr. Kane, are you there? I'll get you to run through the disclosures of interest, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If you can hear me, we have disclosures of interest from 3 elected members tonight. From Councillor Steve Parkinson and item C000622, which is the late item on the LRCI phase 3-4. We have a similar declaration on that item from Councillor Ben Kunza. We have a declaration from Councillor Spencer-Teo and item CC000222, being the city's monthly financial report.
Thank you. Can I just ask you, just for the sake of the recording, just to read the nature of the association? Do you have that there with you or not?
Thank you. Some of these have come in late, but I can, Mr. Mayor. In regard to Councillor Parkinson, it relates to the Hossack Lights project, and he has a long-term connection between coaching the Linwood soccer team and spanning over some 3 decades. In terms of that same item for Councillor Deputy Mayor Kunza, it relates to the Riverton lighting project, where he has been a junior light member of the Riverton Junior Football Club located at the Reserve. In regard to Councillor Spencer-Teo, In the warrant listing, there is a payment that relates to a kindergarten that she has been a member of. And I think I'm just trying to find the specific wording for that, Mr. Mayor. She is the president of the Rossmoyne Community Kindergarten, and they've received a small grant of some $500 listed in the warrant listing.
Thank you, CEO. We'll move on to public question time or question times for the public at item 4. At item 4.1, in response to previous questions taken on notice, there are none in tonight's agenda. At item 4.2, a question must relate to items listed on the agenda paper this evening. If an answer cannot be provided at tonight's meeting, the question will be taken on notice and an answer will be provided at the next ordinary council meeting. I'm going to open public question time at 6:05 p.m. The city has received a number of questions. CEO, can I just ask in relation to the agenda items? I've got questions here from Marnie Aldridge that relate to items that are not items that are actually on tonight's agenda. These are items that relate in general terms to the state of emergency, but are not in relation to items listed on tonight's agenda.
That is correct, Mr. Mayor. They do not relate to items specifically on the agenda.
So those questions, I'll just look at the first one in relation to the state of emergency. Second one about generally about health advice. There is one question there. How isn't supposed to ask? No, that's not in relation to, question 3 is not in relation to a specific item. We have also, so those questions will need to be resubmitted and for the ordinary council meeting next week. Mr. Aldridge has also asked 3 questions. I'll allow the questions from Mr. Aldridge. They relate to an item on tonight's agenda. Director Bowe, if you're there, I'll ask you please to respond to those. But can I say there were some questions in relation to the reasoning behind the city currently holding meetings out of session, or when I say out of session, not in person. I'll just remind people that today the state government has actually put a bill to the Parliament to extend the current state of emergency for until January 2023, and that today, just today, the government announced a new daily record of 12,230 new cases. That's new cases of a highly infectious virus that's in the community, with an increase in hospitalisations and a record 286 COVID positive patients in hospital. Extraordinary numbers. We're not out of this. Those numbers are escalating at the moment. I am taking a cautious approach and I hope the council would support that. We will keep an eye on the health advice, but at this moment, for the May meeting next week, of course, we will remain not in person as we are.
Mr. Mayor, can I just ask a question, please?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just on that, has the WA Health Department changed any of their advice in relation to our current infectious rate? Is the WA Health advice still the same? Does that remain the same?
Which part of it?
All of it. Have we heard from the WA Health? I know we're getting 10 or 12,000 cases a day. Has the WA Health Department changed its view in terms of restrictions?
They've removed all mandates. Is that what you mean? They've removed all mandates.
Yes, I know that. But in relation to this latest increase, we seem to, in the last week, increase the hospital rate and the number of infections that have happened around the community. I think we're up to, I'm not exactly sure, but I think we're up to something like 10 or 12,000 a day.
It's 12,390 today, a record.
Okay, so on that, the health department haven't changed their view in terms of increased restrictions at all since 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, when they lifted the last restrictions was in regards to the masks?
No, they haven't. There's been no changes to the mandates at the moment.
Okay.
And we'll keep an eye on it. As I said, we're taking a cautious approach, and I think that's a reasonable approach. We'll move on. Director Bowe, thank you. I'll get you to read first and then respond to each of the 3 questions posed by Mr. Aldridge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The first question is, can the city confirm that the average residential ratepayer will be paying 4.65% more in rates this year than they did last year? The answer to that question is no, the city cannot confirm this. The report before council tonight is requesting the advertising of differential rates and to receive feedback prior to a final decision on the levying of rates associated with the 2022-2023 budget, which will be undertaken later in June 2022. As noted in the report, the differential rate increases are as per the city's long-term financial plan 2021 to 2031, which was adopted in February 2022, and which is also consistent with the projection presented to the council on the 10th of May at the special council meeting under the report CC-025-21, reframing the long-term financial plan. I have a second question there, Mr. Mayor. Just bear with me. Second question. The long-term financial plan, which is the basis for the proposed rate in dollar increase, promised a $3 million reduction in operating expenses over 3 years. What is the actual reduction in operating expenses achieved so far? The answer to that question, Mr. Mayor, is that the city's administration has delivered more than $2 million in operational savings over the past 2 financial years, with other projects currently underway, such as the restructuring of the city's telecommunications and outsourcing of the cleaning at our leisureplexes, which was recently approved by council to award a contract to a contract cleaner. This will deliver a further $500,000 in savings in the financial year 2022 to 2023. The city has a variety of other projects underway that will deliver on the remaining $500,000 in savings, which are being progressed at this time. The third question, Mr. Mayor, is how much is the council being requested to commit on capital projects from 2022 through to 2025 in EN-011-22, which is a report to the agenda briefing tonight? And are these capital projects included in the long-term financial plan calculations? The answer to that question, Mr. Mayor, is council is being asked to commit about $7.72 million into next year's 2022-2023 annual budget. As per the legal advice referenced in the report, council is unable to commit funds across more than 1 financial year. Council is, however, being asked to support the delivery of a number of significant multi-year projects that were included and funded in the endorsed long-term financial plan across the timeframe 2022 to 2025. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Director Bowe. As there are no further questions from members of the public, question time is now closed. 6:15 p.m. we will make it. At item 4.3 tonight, deputations, there are none. At item 5, items brought forward is of no relevance tonight. Reports of committee meetings, there are none. At item 7, reports, I'll just, councillors, just to make it easy, regarding the order of reports this evening, we will deal with the 3 reports that were published in the AB agenda first, and then we'll move to the 5 items that were published in the late items agenda, so that might make it a bit easier to follow. We will move to item 7.2. Mr. Warren Bowe, the Director of Canning Corporate and Commercial, is a responsible officer. The item is CC-019 of 22, the title of that report being Proposed Differential Rating for 2022 to 2023. That recommendation is on page 4 of tonight's agenda and is also momentarily on screen now. Councillors, do I have any questions on that item? Governance, I'll just get you to take the recommendation down so I can see the council. Thank you. Any questions on that, councillors, before we move on? I can see you all now. Councillor Sweeney, yep, go ahead.
Yeah, I've just got one question on the hardship policy. Does the city charge interest to those people that are on the hardship policy?
Director Bowe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I may ask Mr. Adewale to give some detail in relation to the policy on that question.
Mr. Adewale, just in relation to people utilising the city's hardship policy, question was around whether interest is charged to those people.
Yes, through Mr. Mayor. Yes, we do cease charging of interest under the financial hardship policy for a period of 6 months and allow up to 2 years for the purpose of repayment of that outstanding rights amount.
Thank you. So that's a no, Councillor Sweeney.
That's
No interest?
And so we do charge interest.
So we cease interest for a period of 6 months, and we work with Ratepayer on a repayment plan for the outstanding rights, and we allow them up to 2 years to repay the outstanding debt.
And what interest rate do we charge on that penalty interest?
So penalty interest, Councillor Sweeney, is as adopted by the council. So any if the ratepayer hasn't paid upfront or installment payment, then the penalty interest as adopted by council is generally the maximum 7%. So this will be adopted as part of 22-23 budget. But for the period of cessation, we stop charging interest for a period of 6 months, and then it recommences after that point in time.
So that I've got this right. So somebody that applies to us because they can't pay because they're having difficulty in paying.
Yep.
And they go onto the hardship policy to try and help them out.
Yep.
If things turn worse for them, we then charge them penalty interest at 7%. Is that what you're saying? If they can't pay on the
No, we see.
policy.
No, we don't charge if they're experiencing hardship. We charge them in normal circumstances if they do not apply for hardship and if they haven't made a payment. If they do apply for financial hardship, and my apologies, I said for a period of 6 months, we actually apply concession of a future interest charge for a period of 2 years. So we do not charge any interest for a period of 2 years. And we also allow them to cease payment completely for a period of 6 months.
So there's no interest.
No interest for 2 years.
No interest. People on a hardship policy, no interest for 2 years, but after that, they cop 7%. Is that right?
No, we
That's
work out
correct.
individual
But-
payment plans, don't we?
That's correct. So the intention is, Councillor Sweeney, that when ratepayers are applying under financial hardship policy, they will work with the council with a repayment plan. And from our experience in the current financial year, where we had roughly 25 financial hardship application, most ratepayers, they worked with the council on an agreed repayment plan and started repaying on a small installment. So we also seen rates getting cleared in a period of 6 to 12 months time.
So I don't know if you have the information, but the people that are on those payment plans under the hardship policy, have we had to go back to any people after those 2 years? Has everyone sort of committed to that hardship policy and been able to pay out the money that they owe us?
I'm not sure if we would have reached 2 years yet, would we,
Yeah.
on the policy?
Yeah, I was about to say the policy was only adopted during pandemic. So it's actively in operation for past 2 years. So we have yet to experience those scenarios. Maybe Mr. Bowe has something to comment on that.
Director
Yeah.
Bowe?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I'm happy to take this conversation offline. We'll look into the number of hardship policies and provide some written information to all elected members in relation to how the policy has been administered, whether we've had opportunities to re-engage with those who've already applied and been approved for rate relief and the absence of interest charges, and we'll provide that information under separate cover back to all elected members, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Director. Councillor
Thank
Sweeney,
you.
you happy with
Yeah,
that?
no, thank you. I think it'd be worthwhile getting that information. So thanks very much, Director
Yeah,
Bowe.
absolutely. You need to make sure it's working. Councillor Holland?
Yeah, pardon me, I just wanted to clarify one thing too. We're not charging interest on instalment plans, are we?
You're talking about instalment plans per se?
Yeah, like if you go on the monthly payment or the 3 monthly payment or the 6 monthly or whichever way. We're not charging
Mr.
interest on those payments, are we?
So as per the adopted budget, Councillor Holland, for the current financial year, the installment interest
I
is
would imagine that we are.
2.5%.
Mr. Adewale?
Sorry?
There was a council motion not to charge interest.
No, that's for the hardship policy, wasn't it?
No,
So during the
Mr.
current,
Adewale, the question from Councillor Holland is just in normal circumstances at the moment, considering the situation we're in for people that choose to take periodic payment, the payment plan, are we charging interest on those payments, which I think is 4 a year or whatever it is?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, as part of the adoption of the current financial year's budget 21-22, the council adopted to charge 2.5%. It was 3.25%, and it was seized for a year before. We recommended 3.25, and councillors adopted 2.5% interest on an installment payment. We are allowed to charge up to a maximum of 5.5% if you have financial hardship policy in place, but council adopted 2.5% installment interest for the current financial year.
When did we adopt that?
As part of the adoption process, Councillor Holland.
Okay, part of what adoption process?
Did you want to come back to us, take that on notice,
This was
Mr.
a
Adewale?
notice of motion.
You don't have the
that-
information.
It was endorsed as part of the budget endorsement, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry?
It was endorsed by council as part of the budget 2021-2022.
If I just add, Mr.
It
Mayor,
can't
that
be.
recommendation to adjust the interest rate was actually made by Councillor Holland.
Was made what recommendation to adjust the interest rate?
CEO?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The
Can you provide some
recommendation
clarity?
originally in the budget papers, as Mr. Adewale said, was an interest rate of 3.25%. During the course of the discussion, it was resolved by council to reduce it. And I think it was Councillor Holland, I'm pretty sure Councillor Holland, who moved the reduction in interest rate from the 3.25 down to 2.5.
Well, thinking about it now, if it was a council motion, which it was originally, do we need to do a council motion to reinstate it?
Well, it'll be part of the budget that we will hand down in a few weeks' time, isn't it, Mr. Kane?
Yes, that's right, Mr. Mayor. So as part of the budget papers, you need to adopt the interest rates that apply each year for both hardship, if there's any hardship rates or variation in policy, but the interest rates are part of the formal budget adoption process.
And the next briefing on that, councillor, will be the 23rd of May, so a couple of weeks' time. Thank you. Any other questions on that item, councillors, before we move on? Thank you. We'll move on then to CC 020 of 22, proposed road closure, portion of Brave Rise Road in Wilson. Mr. Bowe is the director responsible for the item. The officer's recommendation is on page 22 of tonight's agenda and is also on screen. Councillors, are there any questions in relation to that item? None, thank you. We will move on then to EN 010 of 22. The title it being Brewer Road, Canning Vale, proposed parking prohibition. Mr. Dion Johnson, the Acting Director of Canning Environment, is the responsible officer. And the officer's recommendation is on page 29 of the agenda and is also on screen. Are there any questions in relation to those proposed parking prohibitions? Councillor Sweeney.
Yes, thank you. I just got one question, just in regards to the consultation that's taken place. I know that from the Canman point of view, I know this company, I know this area quite well, and they've got a real problem there with congestion. But the problem with the cars that are parked on the street, I think nearly all of them are from an employee perspective. They work in the area at one or two businesses nearby. Have we done any consultation in regards to those businesses adjacent to this Canman business in relation to where these people are going to park their cars now? If we put restrictions on parking on the road, have we made any contact with these other two businesses that obviously are big businesses and they're over capacity as far as the parking is concerned on their property, and that's why the employees are parking on the street? Have we spoken to anyone about that?
Mr. Dion Johnson, was there any feedback from, I think 4 were contacted, 2 adjacent, only 2 responded, but was there any feedback specifically about the workaround for workers that may now lose those bays on the street?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. No, there wasn't any direct contact regarding employee parking. Officers do note that there is available parking in adjacent areas, and we don't, the traffic engineers don't believe that there's any major concern there for available parking for adjacent employee businesses.
Thank you. Anything further, councillors, before we move on? Councillor Holland?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I don't know, did I miss something? Was that item EN 1022? Is that item we just discussed?
That's the one we're talking about right now.
Yeah, good. Did I miss something? Did we miss CC 2022 and 21, 22 and 22, 22?
No, they're all the late items, I believe, aren't they?
I don't know.
Well, when I read through at item 7, I talked about how the reports will be dealt with, and I said we'll deal with the 3 reports that were published in the AB first, and then we'll move to the 5 late items that were published in the late item agenda, just to make it easy. If we'd picked up those late items and blended them all through the report, I think councillors might have been a bit confused. You'd have to run back and forwards between the late item.
Cool.
So we'll come to those, Lindsay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Anything further, councillors, before we move on past the Canning Vale item? Thank you. We'll move to the next item, which is CC 020 of 22. Sorry, we've already dealt with that matter. The next item is CC 021 of 22. It is the late item. We're up to the late items now. Review of policy AD 04, Chief Executive Officer Performance and salary review and associated terms of reference. Mr. Warren Bowe is the responsible officer for this item, and the recommendation is on page 1 of the late item agenda and is on screen. Any questions in relation to that item, councillors? None, thank you. We'll keep moving then to CC 022 of 22. Late item again. It's the monthly financial report of April 2022. The officer's recommendation is on page 18 of the late items agenda and is also on screen. Councillors, are there any questions? I have a number that I'd like to ask, but anyone else have a question? Governance, I'll just get Councillor Bain, I think, was that your hand there? Councillor Bain? And Councillor Holland, I'll come to you in a moment.
Page 32, the title is Relocatable Pop-Up Skate Park Willetton. Contract awarded 5th of April 2022. Construction has commenced on site and project completion due by 30th of June. Is this commentary referencing the pop-up skate park works that are currently underway in Inwood? Thank you.
Mr. Bowe?
Might have to ask Mr. Johnson to answer that one, Mr. Mayor. I'm not aware of the status of the particular project.
Mr. Johnson, are you able to answer the question, or would you like to take it on notice?
No, that's correct, Mr. Mayor. The construction has commenced, and I believe it's close to being completed, if not already completed, out of Linwood, adjacent to the youth centre.
Oh, terrific news. Mark, it's nearing completion, apparently. Thank you. I've got a thumbs up from Councillor Bain. Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Mr.
Mayor. Yes, Mr. Mayor. I just got 2 questions. There was one there on the warrant listings for a Gallery 360 artist for nearly 6,300. I was just wondering what that was. And if you'll be surprised if I don't bring out the temporary staff again, it's gone up again. It's $250,000 in 1 month.
Director Bowe, are you able to
fortune?
Are you able to respond in relation to that first item, or would you like to take that on notice and get some details, and also the second question about temporary staff?
I'll take the first one on notice, Mr. Mayor, and at the risk of boring the elected members, the information previously provided indicates that we are holding over a number of particular staff vacancies that require the use of temporary labour hire to fill. And we also had, as most other businesses operating in Western Australia at the moment, some impacts of COVID, which have required us to undertake and engage temporary labour hire. And as I've previously indicated, we will continue to have a labour hire bill that is higher than normal and certainly higher than a few of the elected members expect. We will have a commensurate reduction where appropriate in our employee costs to cover that, and balancing the budget across employee costs and the use of temporary labour hire is something that we're quite satisfied with our performance on, notwithstanding that the quantum that Councillor Holland does reference is quite high.
It's a real issue at the moment, Lindsay. We've addressed it in the budget discussions. Finding staff at the moment is just so hard, and obviously you pay overs for temporary staff. But sorry, your next comment?
Yeah, I sort of understand that, but $250,000 a month?
Yeah, it's a lot of money, guaranteed. Have you got a question you'd like to pose?
Well, that's
you make a comment.
Director Bowes answered it, so thank you.
Well, okay, thanks. Councillors, look, I've got an issue I'd like to raise. Director Bowe, can I ask a question? I'd just refer council to page 48 of the warrant listing and refer them to reference number 043826 on page 48. There's a claim there for councillor allowances for the period way back in 2019, almost 3 years ago. The period is the 30th of May 2019 until the 16th of October 2019. It's a significant sum. It's more than $13,500, and it's under the name of Paul Nung. And I'm thinking, I expect that is the case. Director, can I ask, does that relate to a payment to former Mayor Paul Nung?
I'm not across that specific payment, Mr. Mayor, but I'm happy to take that question on notice and provide you with that information.
I'll just ask a number of questions, and I really would like some answers on this because I'm a little bit interested to know. We did put a policy to council some time ago that was supported about councillor payments. It was mostly in relation to expenses after councillors had left council, but this is 3 years ago, so I'm really interested to know why the city is actually making the payment. So the questions I'd pose are, what was the nature of this $13,608 payment and how did it originate? In other words, did Mr. Nung make a formal claim against the city or to the city? On what date was the claim made by Paul Nung? And whether the claim was initially declined by the city. I'm just wondering why it's taken 3 years for this matter to be resolved. So I'd like to know what date this all eventuated. Has Mr. Nung made any other claims for a reimbursement of allowances or expenses since he left the city of Canning back in October 2019? Are there any other claims pending for Mr. Nung? And I'll just make a note, because it's on the public record, during his term of office, the former mayor advised the city that he wished to be paid only half of his meeting attendance allowance. So I'm wondering if that occurred. Has he actually rescinded that in writing, and has that actually occurred? I'm just wondering how this has actually come about. But of more concern to me is, as the matter concerns a former elected mayor, elected member, and some of the allowances claimed are almost 3 years old, why was the matter not brought before council for it to decide on whether the payment should be approved and the appropriateness of the payment? That would be a question. Under what delegated authority was the payment of $13,608 made to Paul Nung? Are the circumstances of the claim covered by any city policy? It just seems like in my time on council, it's really an extraordinary claim. I can't think that we've ever dealt with one before as a council. And lastly, these claims on these warrant listings, am I to assume that this payment has already been made? Are all the payments already made, or are they paid only subject to council's resolution tonight? Perhaps I could get you to answer that last question.
Yeah,
Director.
thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm able to answer that last question. And yes, those payments that are included in the warrant listing have already been paid. And your questions are now on the public record, and we will receive the transcript and investigate and provide those responses to the entire council as soon as we can.
Thank you very much for that. Councillors, any other questions? I probably won't speculate on what it may or may not be, Lindsay, because it does actually say councillor allowances for period 30th of May 2019 to the 16th of October 2019. So why are we paying councillor allowances? It's not an expense. It's not a reimbursement. It says councillor allowances, and it's $13,500.
Yeah, I'd like to know as well, Mr. Mayor.
It's a bit peculiar.
Mr. Mayor, can you tell me the exact line item? I'm just trying to find it and I can't find it.
It's on page 48 of the report. So the page number on the bottom of the page is 48, and it's reference number 043826. So on about the fourth page, I think. Councillor Amanda Spencer-Teo.
Sorry, sorry, let me just clear my throat.
Okay. You're back on mute there, councillor. Regrettably, you're off mute when you cleared your throat. But
oh, really? I'm so sorry.
We heard it in stereo, but thank you.
Sorry.
We'll have that struck from the record.
Oh, great. Now I've forgotten what I was going to ask. Sorry. Just give me a second. Come back to me, please.
Anyone else have a question before we move on? Councillor Holland, yes?
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Mayor, I can't find it either. Can you go to where it is again?
I've just found it. It's actually on 47, not 48.
It's on page 47. I apologise.
Whereabouts? What number?
43826. 043826. It's pretty easy to spot. It's on the top 1/3 of that page, and it covers 2 lines, carries over to 2 lines. There's a bit of a gap around it. You found it?
Got it. Thank you.
Sorry, I was just going to ask. I recall the newspaper article where the former mayor said he would only take a portion of the allowances, but if he wanted to donate the money back to the city, could he do so? Or is there some form of regulation that we can't accept donations, or would he have to make it to a particular community group or something?
I'm not sure what the relevance of the question is. What do you mean, can he donate?
Well, I'm just saying obviously there was, it was very public that he wasn't going to take the full allowance. If this is that remainder of the allowance, because I also recall in the article being that he, according to SAT, he wasn't able to not accept the allowance, but he could have given the money back somehow.
I think probably accept your question. Thank you. I've asked for the director to provide details around the nature of the claim and how did it originate. So perhaps we won't speculate any longer. We'll wait until the director comes back at the OCM with the answers to those questions.
Mr. Mayor, just quickly.
Yes, Councillor Holt.
Was it possible, and just also to look into, Mr. Mayor, whether it may have been an oversight on our part where, maybe something wasn't paid.
That's right. It could be an oversight.
It could be an oversight that our people have found out, 2 years
later. Could be the result of an internal audit. We might have underpaid him. Let's just wait and see what the answers to the questions are. But it's a peculiar payment, and as I said, one that we've never had to come across. So let's find out why. Thank you, councillors. Any other questions on that? Councillor Sweeney?
Yeah, just a quick question to Director Bowe, if I can, about employees working on the weekends. Director, just out of interest, why are we paying employees, which I would imagine would be on double time on the weekends, to perform what I would think would be non-essential tasks? Why is that occurring? What's the justification, and how is this approved?
Director, just in general terms.
Mr. Mayor, I'm struggling to understand how that relates to the report. Is there a particular line item in the monthly financial report that Councillor Sweeney is referring to? I don't know which project he's talking about, but I'm happy to have a discussion with you.
Are you able to be a little bit specific, Craig, with that?
Yeah, well, I can. Look, it just came up just when we're talking about, well, Councillor Holland spoke about the $250,000 we're paying every month with our employees and our temporary holdings. And I just know on the weekend, I'm watching our people pick up green waste. Now, those people would be getting paid double time, which essentially collecting green waste from the verges would be non-essential work, I would think. I would just think, what's the thought process behind doing that? Can't they do that during the week, and can't we save money by them doing that during the week?
I do agree. We might take that offline if you don't mind. We will get an answer for you. Director Bowe, are you able to provide an answer to Councilman? It is obviously of interest.
Absolutely, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Holland's question was in relation to a line item on tonight's warrant listing, so that's why the question was referred to. But yours is just
no problem,
more
Mr. Mayor. I'm happy
general
to talk
comment.
to the director.
You okay with that, Craig? We'll get an answer.
Yeah, look, it just came up after I was just thinking about what Councillor Holland was saying, because that's quite an extraordinary amount every month that we're paying that. And it's something that just popped into my head over the weekend. So look, I'm happy with that. If Mr. Bowe can get back to us, that's fine. Thank you.
Thanks, Director. Thank you. Any other questions on those items before we move on, councillors? Thank you. We will then move on. If you've got any further questions, please direct them to Director Bowe. We move to EN 011 of 22, the late item. This is for the Restrata Family and Neighbourhood Centre, Stage 2 expansion, progress update. Mr. Johnson, the Acting Director of Canning Environment, again is the responsible officer. The recommendation is on page 51 of the late items agenda and is also on screen. Councillors, any questions in relation to that item? None. Thank you, councillors. Oh, I've got one from Councillor Bain. Hello, Councillor Bain. Sorry, I couldn't see your hand. Councillor Bain, and then I'll go to the Deputy.
That's all right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a few quick questions. Happy to receive the information offline. Just in regard to paragraph 13, if the city would confirm that at this stage it's possible that we could progress with build which has no guaranteed tenant.
Mr. Johnson, paragraph 13 has been referred to in the report.
I don't quite understand that question, Councillor Bain. Could you repeat that and help explain the intent?
Can you just reframe that, Councillor Bain?
Yeah. So a tenant hasn't been found to occupy the extension yet, is that correct? And could we possibly proceed with a build without a guaranteed tenant?
Mr. Johnson.
And speak to that tenancy team.
Sorry?
I'll take that on notice and speak to it, unless Dr. McQuaid is able to respond.
Dr. McQuaid, are you happy for that to be received on notice, or if you've got a response?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, just a quick response. Councillor Bain, we're not seeking a new tenant for the extension. The intent is that Restrata will be operating the new space. Whilst there is a question over the future lease of that area with communities, the city's working through that. We haven't heard back from communities. They have an option to extend the lease. At the moment, that's what's on the table. The conversations we're having is just if Department of Communities do not choose to take that option, then we would need to work directly with Restrata for the leasing of that facility.
Okay, yeah, sure. Next question, the $933,000 plus the additional costs that might be incurred with operational expenditure and ancillary works. So what does the city estimate to be the total funding required from municipal funds?
Mr. Johnson.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. At this stage, we have identified 933,000, I think it is. However, as we continue through the design development stages, we'll continue to get a quantity surveyor to provide estimates, which will, the plan is that they become more accurate as the design develops. So then we can provide council with certainty of the total budget required.
Yeah, sure. So with that expenditure, I was of the understanding that the city, given its financial status, might have difficulty undertaking new capital works. Considering that amount, will that require other projects to be delayed?
Mr. Johnson.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Look, that has been factored into the draft capital works plan for next year, so we believe we can accommodate it. And yeah, quite simply, you know, when we have developed the draft capital works plan, we have considered our capacity to be able to do that.
Would it be possible to let councillors know which projects might be stalled / delayed?
So we have already provided, we've provided the draft capital works list to the elected members post any of those discussions. So I can, you know, re-provide that, but also identify any projects in future years that may be impacted.
Sure. And will the financial contribution, the 933,000, will that impact any way on our LTFP?
I might have to take that on notice unless Director Bowe is able to respond to that one from a financial perspective.
As Dr. McQuaid, I think, has got her hand up. Director Bowe, did you want to jump in, or Dr. McQuaid?
Oh, no, just before Dr. McQuaid, Mr. Mayor, I guess one of the things that we considered when we recommended that the city allocates its LRCI allocations to this project in totality for round 3 was to actually reduce the number of projects that the funding was going to be apportioned to enable us to concentrate, reduce, and enable us to focus on the delivery of the one particular project. That principle remains, notwithstanding that the delivery timeframe is probably going to go outside of what we originally reported back when we considered the LRCI funding for round 3. So I'm confident that it can be incorporated within the LTFP, and the other budgeted projects, or the other budgeted projects and the projects that are in the LTFP can be delivered in conjunction.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Singh. I'll come to you in a moment. I've seen your hand up. I've got the Deputy Mayor in front of you, and Councillor Bain. Anything further?
Nothing at this moment, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Kunza.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Just with respect to paragraph 20, whilst I'm very happy to see staff costed and quantified, something I've been saying for years, I'm just wondering why it's only done in select projects. Even later on in the council agenda, we've got 3 sport lighting projects. Only one of them have officer time quantified. I'm just wondering, with the Hillview Hub, it wasn't quantified. The city centre, it's not quantified. Just wondering why in select projects it's articulated in the officer report.
Are we aiming to head this way, Mr. Johnson? Is that something we're aiming to do?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it is an oversight, and it's something that we are aiming to improve, and we hope from now on that it will be included consistently.
But I guess even later on, we've got officer report with 3 sport lighting projects, and one of them have it and the other 2 don't. I'm just wondering why certain projects are highlighted.
CEO.
Is it going to?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. In fact, I was the one who insisted we put reference to this. In fact, all 3 sports lighting projects will have officer time. We wanted to distinguish quite clearly that the rules around LRCI are different to other projects. Other projects were able to allocate all costs specifically to the capital account. The LRCI projects specifically exclude any preliminary costs, post costs being apportioned back to it. It also excludes any allocation of GST. So make it more transparent, Deputy Mayor, to Council, that in approving a sum, say for Rostrata, of 1.766, whilst you might allocate 883,000 of the, or 833,000 of LRCI funding, all other costs have to be borne by the municipal account. Now, the way we do all the preliminary projects for this and all previous rounds of LRCI is we have 2 core accounts. One is for parks-related projects, and the other one is for build projects. So we build a building like Rostrata, all of their preliminary costs will go to that build account. What it does mean is that when we start a project, in some cases, we will have a fairly good indication of what those costs are going to be. But in others, if I use an example of a project we're about to start in some more detail with Corinthian Park later on, we will have an understanding of what our costs should be. However, if we continue to work that project through with the occupants and detailed design changes or final design changes, well, the additional on costs are going to go up. So we need to be able to account for them. I want Council to be clear that when you allocate funds for the LRCI projects, like the Rostrata or the lighting projects, we cannot allocate any of those on costs to the LRCI funds.
Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, so phase 1 and 2, 150,000 for a pump track in Canning Vale. We had many playground renewals that didn't go through the same sort of transparency. Basically, we have staff, they carry out the projects. It wasn't included in the report. So I'm just wondering what's changed in that regard.
So if I could, through the chair.
CEO, yes.
Thank you. So to make it more transparent to council, as some questions have asked me just recently about another project that was completed under round 2 and where those additional costs have gone, I wanted to make it quite clear to you that these additional costs are to be incurred and we have to account for them against the municipal accounts. Now, we account for them out of one of those two accounts. So again, Deputy Mayor, it's about trying to make it more transparent to council that when you allocate a sum for a project, it won't be the total sum. It's only that sum for LRCI we can allocate back to the LRCI under their program rules.
Thank you, CEO. Anything further, Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Sarah. And just lastly, paragraph 14 with respect to the advocacy to Dr. Krishnan, I'm just wondering why it's still, like, I know the city has met with Dr. Krishnan. I'm wondering why it's still preparing formal representation. Why hasn't it occurred? I know the mayor meets with them. I know staff meet with them. Why hasn't this been raised already?
CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Mayor, through the chair, you'd be aware that after we had the last meeting, I specifically, in fact, I came back to the mayor and said, were you able to raise that issue with Dr. Krishnan? And at that time, the mayor said, look, it was simply an oversight. When he met with him, he didn't raise it. However, because it's part of a council resolution, we need to come back and formally close that part out. So that's why there's a reference to it in the item.
Thank you. I had Councillor Singh with his hand up. Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is, when we rent or lease our facility, which is City of Canning's buildings, to, let's say, Department of Communities, especially at a discounted rate of something, let's say $1 a year or something like that, do we have any control over? Sorry?
Can you oil that? I can hear something squeaking.
That's my 10-month-old in the other room. He's not crying out. He's very excited and I can't shut him off. So I think he's quiet now. Okay. So my question is, we give a lease of one of our buildings to, let's say, Department of Communities at a discounted rate of $1 a year. Do we have any control over that at what rate Department of Community is charging higher fees for that facility to our community? Any sort of control over that? Can they charge whatever they like, even though it's our facility?
Director Bowe, do we have a policy position on that that'll control subleasing of our premises?
Certainly, Mr. Mayor, I don't believe we do, no. But we do have a policy which is BR01, which is due for review, which identifies the ability to charge rent to community groups, to government groups, and to commercial entities. And that is the council endorsed policy. Only last month we had a report that was presented, and the result was the application of what is perceived or could be perceived to be a discounted rental to the Department of Communities in accordance with the policy.
A good point, Hardeep. It could be a matter that really needs to be addressed as a policy issue. Call it forward for review and we'll have a look at it. There certainly seems to be some sort of gap there, you're right.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's all.
Anyone else, councillors, before we move on? Councillor Bain.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's likely that the extension could cost the bill that is over $1 million from the municipal funds. We require that sort of contribution. Just one of the concerns is that I haven't seen any concept plan. Is there any concept plan available that councillors can view before this commitment is made? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, there is. There's a very basic one that we've been working through with the community group, but we can provide that via email tomorrow for you.
Thank you. Councillor Amanda Spencer, TO.
So with the swapping of the lighting project, I recall this being spoken about, or I could have just thought it. So with the lighting projects that we're now putting in that place, we were going to use predominantly municipal funds to fund that. Now the LRCI funding is funding it. Therefore, you could say that it's a bit of a, it's more of an accounting thing where we're taking from that and giving to another thing, but in the end, it all kind of balances out. Is that the right kind of
Director McQuaid.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, that's correct, Councillor Spencer-Terr. So as discussed at the budget workshop,
that's right. That's where it was.
We did have funds listed in the budget and the LTFP for lighting infrastructure for next year. We are able to swap those funds over so that we can undertake this and complete the lighting projects this financial year, or sorry, not this financial year, but in the 22-23 financial year, and not impact on the bottom line of the budget. And as we've said in the LRCI report that's up next, there will be no additional lighting projects that would take place in the 22-23 financial year.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, I've just lost a couple of you off screen. I just need to ensure this is an official meeting that you're actually still here. So sorry, can I just ask you to turn your videos on so I can actually see you, just to confirm they're actually here in the meeting. Thank you very much to those councillors for returning. Appreciate it. Any other questions on that item, councillors, before we move on? None. Thank you very much. We shall then move on to EN 012 of 22, another late item, request for financial commitment of multi-year capital projects from 2022 to 2023 and 2024 to 2025. The recommendation is on page 58 of the late items agenda and is on screen. Councillors, do we have any questions in relation to this item? None. Deputy Mayor?
Just two questions.
Come to you in a moment, then I'll come to Councillor Holland. Yep.
Just two questions. With regard to the fleet renewal program, is there a reason why the city is purchasing so many vehicles at once, especially in the current climate?
Deputy Mayor, you're frozen.
Am I? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I've got you there. You're right. Sorry. Continue.
So was I just frozen to you? I was just asking, why is the city going through a fleet renewal program at the current time with so many vehicles, given the current climate and the difficulty in purchasing new vehicles around the world? Is this something we really need to be doing now?
Director?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The approach has and always is based on asset management principles. The city takes the approach of a 5-year useful life for vehicles. So it's simply in line with the age and condition of the vehicles for a simple renewal.
Deputy Mayor?
So the current distortion in trade doesn't affect the city's desire to go through the normal asset renewal program?
Not when it, sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor, not when it comes to the fleet plan.
And just another question, with respect to the Kent Street Weir project, sorry, this seems to change all the time, but why is there no costs associated with the 24-25 year?
Mr. Johnson?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's as per the long-term financial plan, and we're simply replicating what was in the plan.
CEO, I've seen you pop up on my screen. Did you want to say something?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was going to make just a remark in regard to the first question for the Deputy Mayor, and particularly the quantum of the fleet and the renewal plant is pretty much comparable with previous years. But the real issue for us is noting that the longer supply chains, because all of our vehicles are sourced from overseas. We don't produce vehicles here anymore. Because it's taking longer, if we don't put orders in now, we actually won't receive any of that fleet at all next financial year. So we're trying to ensure that we're maintaining our fleet assets and standard, which allows us to continue to deliver the service, knowing we've got these much longer supply chain and lead times to acquire equipment.
And I guess it could get worse. Deputy Mayor, did you have anything else? No? Shaking your head, thank you. Councillor Amanda Spencer-Terr, and then I'll come to Councillor Holland, I think was waiting. Councillor Amanda Spencer-Terr.
Thank you. I've got a few questions on this. Firstly is, why are we doing this now and not part of the budget process?
Mr. Johnson? CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In regard to the only item you're actually dealing with now is item 1. And said if we leave it to the budget to deal with, it's 2 months down the track, then by the time we normally go through this, we will not have any of that fleet arrive during the financial year. So elected members have consistently and asked, he said, why aren't we delivering our capital works program? So one of the reasons we're delivering our capital works, we need to deliver them and to ensure we can deliver it better, is be able to place orders now in order to guarantee delivery of that equipment and allow the cash to be dealt with. Secondly, in terms of those other long lead items, one which are multi-year projects, in terms of, again, giving you better visibility, but also more certainty. You might choose to allocate monies into a single year. Kent Street Weir is a good one. We know that project is multi-million-dollar project. But if you're trying to give some certainty to the users down there or to us to be able to place the orders, then clearly identifying these as major multi-year projects now gives, and as Councillor Spencer Teo, as we had a discussion around another project just the other day, it gives the participants and users of that project certainty that Council's going to initiate the further expenditure in accordance with the plan.
That leads on to my next question, is the corporate business plan is referenced a lot in the officer recommendation, yet item 2 doesn't seem to reconcile with the corporate business plan in that there are 20 CapEx projects that span over more than one financial year starting next financial year, but they're not listed here. So that kind of raises a bit of a red flag to me as to why these 3 projects are being included here when there's the Hillview that's still got budget allocations up until 2025. You've got the LED smart lighting conversion, $5.4 million, which is over 22, 23, 23, 24. You've got, as you mentioned earlier, the Corinthian Park Hall, Metcalfe Road rehabilitation, Welshpool Road. There's 17 other major projects in the corporate business plan that aren't listed here. So I would like to see them on there because they're all very important projects that the community are expecting delivery of, yet we only seem to single out these 3.
Your question being, why aren't they? Why have we only listed the 3?
Yes.
CEO?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and that's a very good question. We set a threshold where projects had to exceed more than I think it was $1 million in order to deal with it, and also be such that they weren't in a position to be broken up into separate proportions. If we take Queen's Park, the overall spend on Queen's Park is $6.3 million, $6.8 million from memory. That will need to be done as a package of work. So when we go to tender with that to a single supplier, we'll need to do it as a package of works. Some of the other projects you referred to, Councillor Spencer Teo, are ones where, whilst we've identified future expenditure in them in years to come in Hillview, the nature of those expenditures are small scale, and council may or may not choose to support them at that particular time. But you can't start half of Queen's Park. We need to start all of Queen's Park. We're trying not to half start Kent Street Weir. Kent Street Weir is a number of discrete projects on the way through. But we also wanted to be clear that Kent Street Weir is a very big project. Now, we are trying to give you better visibility and also limit the amount of monies we're having to carry over from one year to the next. That was the purpose of the item. This does not formally commit you. You'll still deal with that commitment in the budget process. But you might come back and afterwards and say, right, if there's another particular project that you're concerned about in the corporate business plan and worried that there might only be 1 year's allocation and we need to ensure there is additional allocation made, then I suggest that be included as an amendment.
Councillor Spencer Teo.
Sorry, then in saying that there's 7 projects in the corporate business plan, which are $1 million plus, that start next financial year and go on to other financial years. So then why aren't those 7 included in this?
CEO?
That's not included in Hillview.
If Councillor Spencer Teo just sends through the details of those, I'll come back in writing on that matter.
Okay, because I'd like it all to reconcile. That's all. I'm just having a bit of problem there. So that'd be great.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Holland. And then I'll come to Councillor Hardeep Singh. I'll come to you in a moment. Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've just got a couple of queries. If you're going to order the replacement on the fleet items and things like that, And so we put that through in the budget, and it doesn't come through next year, or because some of the cars now have got even up to an 18-month delivery time out. How do you reconcile that on the budget when you've got it in the budget? Does just that go as an item carried forward? And how does the money, or does it just go money's carried forward? I don't quite understand how we can do that.
Mr. Mayor, do you want me to answer the question?
Yes, please.
Thank you. And through the chair. So once the project is on the budget, in this case, you notice it's an absolute majority to formally endorse it. That's for the commit the monies that would go into the budget. We're in a position then to place an order. Now, we won't, as you've said quite clearly, Councillor Holland, in some cases have that goods, possibly until late in the year. We can sometimes receive goods and also not have formally transacted the cash. So that cash, if that hasn't been transacted, would be transacted at the end. So particularly right at the end of the financial year, you might have received a good late in June, but not formally had the cash go to your bank account in July, and that would be a carry forward. So what we're trying to do with these is, firstly, particularly with fleet, is guarantee that we can get as many items ordered upfront and limit the amount of time that we have uncertainty about it, and also spend, Council, the money we've allocated for that project in the year in which you're adopting the budget.
Councillor Holland.
So that's what I don't understand. If you're adopting that into the budget by normal process of when these fleet were due for replacement, surely that would have taken care of that then, because otherwise, how you won't have drawn down the funds on certain items. I can't see how this is. It worries me that we're going out 22, 23, 24. I don't understand how the accounting works like that. And I think you said before that there's legal ramifications on how we do this as well. I mean, how can we put something, a draft for a budget allocation for 3 years in advance?
So you'll note through the chair that we're not. We're only the only allocation would be then is specifically fleet. And that's what we're saying under item 2, endorse capital projects that have got a greater spend than is allocated in a single year. For instance, if we start Shelley Beach Master Plan as an example, as a $3 million total spend, but all we're going to do is spend $250,000 master plan. How does it give the users in that area any certainty that that there's going to be future allocation? Now, we can't commit now those future allocations now, but by telegraphing to the community that we're spending $250,000 now in Shelley Beach, with the clear expectation that we'll be asking council to spend the monies that are shown in the item in the subsequent financial years, then you're giving the community some further certainty about what council's intentions are. You don't formally commit it because you can only commit the funds in that year, but you're indicating, look, these are big multi-year projects, and we're trying to tell you, the community, that we're serious about delivering them, and these are where the timeframes are anticipated for those allocations of the capital. The only one we can actually commit to now is the fleet.
But that says here, council supports the allocation of funding in the draft 23-24 budget. I don't quite follow.
It might support it as a principle. So when staff bring back the budget for next year for 23-24, by doing an endorsing, you're asking us to put the project as a list for funding. Doesn't mean you commit to it. In fact, you can't commit to it and you actually adopt the budget. But it becomes quite clear to staff then, what's council's intention? Council's intention is that you will start this process and you will bring part of it back each of those years there in order to deliver the entire suite.
Is this normal accounting procedures that we go out like this, go into the future like this? Is this standard?
So what we're trying to do through the chair is give you more certainty about the longer term decision making. But more importantly, when you are asking us, why are we carrying over such large sums of cash in any year? If we said in order to initiate, let's say, Shelley Beach Master Plan, we need to put all of that money into this year's budget to give certainty that we're going to do Shelley Beach, then quite simply, there would be close to $3 million that would carry over this year, at the end of next year, and less the year after, and less the year after. Now, that doesn't make a lot of sense. It certainly gives certainty that the cash is going to be there. but it doesn't make sense if you're trying to see that the capital works allocation. So we're trying to help you not only make the decisions and make clear to the community what the decisions are, but make clear to the community that these decisions have multi-year impacts. They're not just a one-off capital project. We'll upgrade a road and be completed in 1 year.
But we have projects like this. We've had these for years, probably decades, that we've had multi-year projects. Have we always done this? That's what I said. Is this a normal accounting procedure?
So through the chair, because I've lost the chair somewhere. Does anyone see the Mayor?
Yes, sorry.
Right.
Excuse me, CEO, if you can hear me. The Mayor has lost his laptop at the moment, so he has lost connection with the meeting. We're just grabbing another laptop to try and get him on. So we just ask if, in the interim, if the Deputy could continue to chair the meeting whilst we sort out the Mayor, please.
No worries. Interim CEO, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. You'd appreciate in this year's or last year's budget where we some $40 million of expenditure and we had $25 million we actually delivered and $15 million carried forward. And council comes back and asks the question, well, why aren't you spending the money we've allocated to you? Now, if we go through the process of just allocating all the monies up front, we need to do a project, knowing it's going to take multiple years to deliver it, we will continue to carry over large chunks of cash each year. And you'll continue to come back to us and say, well, why are you carrying this money over? So we're saying to you, let's be clear. A number of these projects are multi-year projects. And if you want to minimize the amount of money we need to carry over each year, then we should only be allocating what we can spend in this current year. But in choosing to start a project, you should be starting on the basis you understand there is an allocation in year 1 and there'll be allocations in year 2 and year 3.
So this is a standard accounting process.
But this is, through the chair, an approval and an improvement to the way we're trying to make transparent to you and to the community about what the allocations of capital will be for multi-year projects. And there's not an issue of accounting irregularity about it. You're
I
not
wasn't saying that. I was just because I think you brought up before that you sought legal advice on this.
We did, and
So I wasn't bringing that up. That was answering that.
So that's why, it's endorsing the allocation, as Councillor Spencer Teo says, there may be other projects we need to come back and put in this list. But it's quite clear to you and to us that your expectation is, in starting the Shelley Beach Master Plan, that there'll be allocations for that project over the next couple of years. And if you decide you don't want to do it, then we don't endorse that project. But it doesn't make any sense when we start a project, if we do not have certainty that there'll be the allocation of the fund to complete it. More importantly, if we're going to start it, that there will be allocations in the subsequent years necessary to continue to deliver it.
Any further questions, elected members? Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. 3 questions, if I may.
Go ahead.
The city reduces expenditure on the Kensington Street Weir precinct/project by $413,000 last year. Well, sorry, this financial year. So does that mean the 550 is essentially or effectively a carryover with 137 in additional expenditure?
Mr. Johnson?
While we don't strictly reference it as a carry forward in that respect, you could argue that it is effectively the same amount of money.
Councillor Bain?
I might just jump in if I could, Deputy Mayor. I think we will come back and take that on notice because my understanding is Kent Street Weir, is this the additional allocation needed to start next year's project, not allocations required to continue this year's project. If this year's project is incomplete, then we will have a carryover fund of this year's project. So I think, Mr. Johnson, you just need to be clear, the $550,000, is that an allocation specifically for parts of the project which we have yet started? And if so, then it has nothing to do with the carryover of any funds from this year.
Mr. Johnson?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, correct. It's not an allocation or for work that has started. We would like that certainty to begin.
Yeah.
So it's for the design, Councillor Bain?
Yeah, sure. And so that's 550. Does the city anticipate that that'll be sufficient to carry out the proposed works as far as the car park, wetland buffer, the new dog fence, etc.? That'll be sufficient. Is that correct?
Mr. Johnson?
Through you, Deputy Mayor. No, it won't be sufficient for actual civil works. It'll be sufficient though for all the detailed design work required and all the sub-consultants required to get the design to a point where it's going to be shovel ready to progress the project further.
That was your question. It's enough for all the design work for all the different aspects of the Kent Street Weir project, Councillor Bain?
Yes. So considering that, there is the potential that with that money being contributed towards design works, that it may just be the pump track that's delivered in the next few months, and then there won't be any works conducted at the site for possibly 12 months. Is that correct?
Through you, Deputy Mayor. That's correct, Councillor Bain.
Okay. Paragraph 14, it mentions seeking the Minister's approval. If I remember correctly, last year at a meeting, this was brought up and the city was going to seek approval from the Minister to conduct works at the site. So does that mean that we need the Minister's permission for two different projects at the site, or we haven't yet sought the Minister's permission to do so?
Mr. Johnson?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, and my understanding is that we sought permission to complete the sewer works. The sewer works, from memory, is around about $750,000 to $800,000. Because we need Minister approval for any works over $500,000, and we had certainty that we're going to deliver the sewer works, we sought that approval, and then we'll have to go back and seek further approvals for the remainder of the project, which we hope to do as one package once it's all designed.
Councillor Bain?
So in the interim, his or her permission isn't, I think it's Minister Whitby, possibly, Minister of Environment. But so we at this moment in time, we don't need his express permission to do the design works, or is it his permission that we need to commit the 550?
Mr. Johnson?
No, we only need permission when we break ground, effectively.
Okay.
But what we also need to do is work through the Aboriginal heritage requirements, and then that will be packaged up as well as part of the process.
Okay.
Councillor Bain, anything further?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
While we're on Kent Street, with respect to my previous question on 24-25, the corporate business plan, it doesn't segregate or separate the different amounts in different years, but it did have the indication that funds would be apportioned in that year. I'm just wondering, given the previous answer, is that, like, should there be funding? Should there be works committed in that year? I went back quickly and looked, and it should, according to the corporate business plan, it should.
Sorry, Warren.
Yeah, sorry, Deputy Mayor, your last bit was the corporate business plan does.
So the corporate business plan seems to indicate that funds should be apportioned in the 24-25 year. I'm just, given my previous question, that aligns with the long-term financial plan, and the corporate business plan, I guess, directs that, says how we're going to do it.
Yeah,
just wondering.
Sure. It may actually be just a misalignment between the two, but having said that, so when the LTFP and all of the projects and all the strategies were put in, and we did a significant body of work to ensure that we had funded the large majority of them, there were some projects that were unable to be funded. And what we've acknowledged is that there'll be a significant review of the long-term financial plan, probably within 18 months, I would have thought. In that time, we'll also endeavour to attract external funding. we were aware of what the announcement was over the weekend in relation to some funding that may or may not be available for the Kent Street Weir. So in all of those considerations, there wasn't an allocation in the LTFP. There are other opportunities over that time before we undertake a review of the LTFP to identify either some savings in other projects or deferral of projects to bring forward. But I understand your point in that we're going to start the project and it appears from that table that we have a hiatus of the project. We understand that we all need to try and, through the review of the LTFP and the CVP, ensure there's an allocation to continue the project.
Thank you. Any further questions from any other elected members? All right, I think the Mayor's coming in a moment, but we'll just move on to the next item, which is CO00622, Local Roads and Community Infrastructure Program, Phases 3 and 4. Any questions on that one?
I've got a question.
Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. My question is, the original officer recommendation for LRCI Phase 3 grant was for storage facility at a couple of parks. This was changed because council decided to go ahead with Rostrata. Now that there is this funding is back in question, why the original recommendation hasn't come up? Why the new sports lighting recommendation came from the officer?
Director. Deputy, thanks very much for that. By the magic of television, I'm back. Don't ask me what happened. Thanks, Ben, for that. Director, can I get you to respond?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Singh, for the question. That's correct. The officer recommendation originally for LRCI did include storage facilities. As we discussed in the budget workshop, we were planning to undertake a number of lighting projects as priority projects next financial year to ensure that we can still deliver on the Rostrata commitment. The best option at this stage was to look at, as we've already said, utilising funding listed in the budget for lighting to complete the Rostrata project with LRCI Phase 4 and to bring the lighting projects to be completed next financial year and within the timeframes. Each of those lighting projects are projects that have been planned, costed, and in terms of timelines, we know we can deliver. We've obviously have now nearly, 5 months into the year. That was part of our considerations about what projects can we complete in the timing and what funding can we utilise.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, yes. Just to clarify, and I wasn't actually in that workshop, I did listen to the audio. So just to be clear in my, the original recommendation was for sports storage, and I'm just talking LRCI Phase 3 funding of $1.7 million. We decided to give that funding to Rostrata. Due to federal government rejecting that Rostrata project is ineligible for that funding, we are now trying to find a suitable candidate for that funding. So that candidate, instead of sports storage, we are choosing lighting project, just because if we choose lighting projects, then we can reallocate lighting projects money to Rostrata. So it's just because of reallocation of money, but the reasoning why sports storage was needed and why these lights are needed, there is no comparison. Which one is more important?
Just a question. Is there a question there, Councillor?
Yes. Basically, the question here is the original recommendation that was we need sports storage in a couple of parks, right? There was quite a lengthy recommendation why it's needed there. And now the recommendation is we need lighting. So what happened to the sports storage? Why lighting is more important than sports storage?
Director McQuaid, what is happening to the sports storage?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. If you ask any given community group, it will be a toss-up between lighting and sports storage as their priorities. Sports lighting is a priority for the city. We have a program, a scope of works for sports lighting to continue. So it has always been a priority for the city. Sports storage is still a priority for the city. We are working with a number of groups to provide some interim sporting storage solutions. So that is still taking place. And as we have already advised the elected members, part of the community infrastructure plan will have a dedicated focus to sports storage, and most importantly, ensuring that we have a model for sports storage that is standardised across our reserves, that is financially viable. I do remember there was a number of questions around the level of funding that we were looking to allocate to sports storage. So we are undertaking some research at this point in time to inform modular type storage options that will allow us to hopefully deliver more storage across more reserves within a limited budget. So it's still priority and it still will take place. It's just where we're at this point in time with what projects we've got and what we can deliver.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, Director, yes. If I understand correctly, you have said based on community feedback, lighting is more important than storage. My question is why the original recommendation wasn't for lighting? Why we went for storage?
I would have to go back and have a look at the, sorry, Mr. Mayor, through you. I would have to go back and have a look at the officer recommendation. We didn't just put up storage. We put a number of projects up as I recall. I don't have that recommendation to hand at the moment. And we have undertaken consultation with community groups over sports lighting. That's why the city holds a priority list for sports lighting. And equally, we're working with clubs on storage. And I would suggest that we probably get more ad hoc conversations around storage, and we probably get more of a consistent demand for adequate sports lighting.
We'll take the question on notice, Councillor, and get back to you with a formal response.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In that formal response, if I could please ask that what community response has been received since the original recommendation of storage, which has made the change of recommendation from storage to lighting? That will be very helpful.
Just how that change was made. Director, if you can provide any context, that would be helpful. Thank you, Councillor Singh. I have Councillor Spencer-Teo.
Sorry, just on that, again, if my memory serves me correctly, wasn't it also a case that the projects had to be shovel ready and that we had all these lighting projects, the design's been done, they're pretty much ready to go, we just didn't have the funding, whereas with the sports storage, we would still need time, and obviously that time's lapsed now, to do the design and the procurement and things like that. Would that be correct?
Director?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, Councillor Spencer-Teo, that is correct. As I said to Councillor Singh, the sports lighting projects are designed and costed and are ready to go, and we're still undertaking that work for storage facilities.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, cool, thanks.
Okay, Deputy Mayor? I'll come back to you, Councillor Singh. Deputy Mayor?
No need. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Singh.
Mr. Mayor, further to Councillor Amanda's question, I understand that sports storage might not be a very viable option now just because more planning is needed. But my question still remains there. When the original recommendation came in, why lighting wasn't a preference and storage was a preference, and that preference has now changed?
Yeah, no problem. We'll get an answer. Absolutely, we'll get an answer for you. Terrific. Any other questions, Councillor, on this item before we move on? This is the last item for this evening. No, that's it. Thank you very much. Councillors, thanks for coming tonight. At item 8 this evening, notice is a motion for consideration at the next OCM. There are none. Urgent business tonight, there is none. Confidential matters, there are also no confidential matters. And as far as closure go, I declare the meeting closed. The agenda briefing of tonight closed at 7:30 p.m. And I thank you all for attending. Thanks, everyone.